Welcome back. Today we're tackling, well, the biggest story there is. Our story. Human evolution. It often gets presented as this straight line, ape to human, a simple march.
Yeah, a ladder. But the sources we've dug into, they paint a much richer picture. It's far more dynamic and, frankly, way more interesting.
Exactly. Not a ladder, more like a feedback loop, a constant conversation almost, between our biology and our culture.
That's really the heart of it, isn't it? That's the core insight we're chasing today. Our mission, if you like, is to unpack the ideas, the foundational concepts that explain how we got here.
So we're looking at everything from those early, sometimes kind of flawed theories that, paved the way for Darwin.
Right. All the way through the key players in the hominin lineup, the different species.
And then bringing it right up to today, how we actually study our own genetic story using some pretty advanced methods.
Exactly. We're aiming for those moments where it clicks, the surprising connections, the synergies that really make Homo sapiens unique.
We've got quite a stack of material here. It covers, well, everything from the nitty-gritty of ancient skull shapes to some ongoing debates in modern genetics.
So let's dive in. We'll start with that core concept, the thing that really sets our evolutionary journey apart, this biocultural feedback loop.
Right. So the central idea here is synergy. It's not just biology or culture, it's the interplay between them. Biological adaptations, those are driven by genetics, by natural selection, interacting constantly with cultural innovations.
Things like tools, social rules, language.
Precisely. You really can't understand one without the other. They're feeding each other, driving each other forward continuously.
Okay, let's make that concrete. Where do we start biologically? I mean, maybe the most radical shift early on has to be bipedalism, right? Just standing up.
It sounds simple, standing up. But yeah, it was a massive overhaul, a complete redesign of the body's architecture happening very early in our lineage.
It wasn't just flipping a switch. Not at all. Habitually walking on two legs, it demanded huge changes. Think about the spine we developed, those S-shaped curves. They act like a spring, a shock absorber, and they keep our center of gravity balanced right over our feet.
And the pelvis.
Totally reshaped. Went from being tall and narrow like an ape's to this broad, bowl-shaped basin. That's essential for anchoring the big gluteal muscles you need for stable walking.
Muscles we use constantly when we walk.
Exactly. And the femur, the thigh bone, is angles inward. That's called the valgus angle. It means your knees are positioned directly under your body's weight. Makes striding much more efficient.
That's a lot of intricate mechanical change. So what was the big, immediate evolutionary win for making that commitment? Why go through all that trouble?
The payoff was huge and immediate. It freed the hands. Suddenly, hands weren't needed for locomotion anymore.
So they could carry stuff. Babies, food.
Yes, carry resources, carry infants, but critically, make and carry tools. That biological shift cracked open the door for complex culture. Plus, bipedalism is really efficient for covering long distances, especially across open ground like the savannas where early hominins were living. Big survival advantage there.
Okay, so bipedalism gets established, freeing the hands. Meanwhile, another key biological trend is picking up steam. Our brains getting bigger, and cephalization.
Right, this is a real signature of our genus, Homo. Brain size relative to body size just took off over millions of years, and that directly translates to enhanced cognitive abilities.
Thinking power.
Yeah, foresight, planning, abstract thought, much more complex communication, and crucially, problem solving. That raw cognitive horsepower is what you need to develop sophisticated tools, complex social groups, all of it.
And that increasing brain power ties directly into what we ate, right? There were major dietary shifts happening too, more meat and eventually cooking.
Cooking. This is maybe the perfect example of culture-driving biology. Cooking is purely cultural. No other animal does it systematically.
But once we started doing it,
it had profound physical effects. Cooking essentially pre-digests food. It breaks down tough plant fibers, makes proteins easier to absorb, kills parasites. It just makes food safer and way more digestible.
So our bodies didn't have to work as hard?
Exactly. That cultural practice, cooking, it reduced the selective pressure for the biological equipment needed to process raw, tough food. Think big guts, massive chewing muscles, large teeth.
So if the food's easier to deal with, our bodies adapt.
We save a ton of energy. Chewing and digesting raw food takes a lot of time and metabolic energy. Cooking means you get more calories, more net energy out of the same amount of food.
And over generations.
Our anatomy changed. Our teeth and jaws got smaller. The size of our digestive tract, which is really energy hungry, shrank. and that freed up metabolic energy could be redirected elsewhere.
Like fueling that increasingly large and very expensive brain.
Precisely. A cultural trick, cooking basically rewrites the body's energy budget, paving the way for even more brain growth. It's a fantastic loop.
Amazing. Okay, so that's culture driving biology. What about the key cultural drivers pushing things along?
Well, tool use in technology is the obvious one. It's this thread running through our entire lineage, getting progressively more complex.
It's not just a result of having a bigger brain, it's also a driver.
Absolutely. Making even the earliest stone tools, the Oldowan choppers, requires hand-eye coordination, some planning. Then you get to the Acheulean hand axe.
The teardrop-shaped ones.
Yeah, those show standardization. The maker had a mental template, a concept of the final form, before they started flaking the stone. That implies teaching, learning, passing knowledge down, real cultural transmission.
And the ultimate cultural tool, the one that allows for that deep cross-generational sharing of knowledge, has to be language.
No question. Complex symbolic language is the great accelerator. It lets you plan in detail, share information incredibly rapidly, coordinate actions on a massive scale. Think organized hunting, specialized roles within a group.
Building complex societies.
Exactly. And creating those strong social bonds, you need to support individuals through long childhoods, especially with those big, slow-developing brains.
Okay, let's wrap this section up by explicitly linking the loop again. We said bipedalism biology enabled tool-making culture. Give us another example of culture-pushing biology besides cooking.
Okay, think about cooperation. As environments changed or resources got scarce, groups that could cooperate effectively had an edge. Individuals who were perhaps genetically predisposed to better communication or following social rules or learning quickly,
They would have done better.
they'd likely have higher survival and reproduction rates. So those cultural needs, cooperation, sharing information, teaching complex skills, they actually put selective pressure back onto our genes, favoring traits like bigger brains, maybe specific cognitive abilities related to sociality or language.
So it just keeps spiraling. Biology enables culture, culture puts pressure on biology, driving further biological change, which allows for even more complex culture.
That's it. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. That dynamic synergy is the story of becoming human.
Understanding this whole biocultural loop, though, it didn't happen overnight. There was centuries of thinking building up to it. To really get Darwin's impact, we kind of need to look at the ideas he was reacting against.
That's a great point. And the key figure before Darwin, the one everyone learns about, is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Now, his theory was revolutionary for its time because it proposed that life changed over time, which wasn't universally accepted. But his mechanism was off.
What were his main ideas?
He had this, well, logical-sounding framework based on two main principles. First was use and disuse. Basically, if an animal used a particular body part a lot, it would get stronger, bigger, more developed. If it didn't use it, it would shrink, atrophy, maybe disappear.
Makes sense, like muscles getting bigger with exercise.
Exactly. And the second part, the really famous bit, was the inheritance of acquired characteristics. He argued that those changes an organism acquired during its lifetime, through use or disuse, in response to its environment.
Could be passed directly to its kids.
That was the idea. The classic example is the giraffe. Lamarck suggested that ancestral giraffes stretched their necks to reach higher leaves. This stretching, done over a lifetime, made the neck slightly longer. And that slightly longer neck, that acquired trait, was then inherited by the next generation. Repeat that for long enough and you get the modern giraffe.
You can see why it was appealing. It feels intuitive, but scientifically.
Yeah, it hit major problems. The big empirical nail in the coffin came later, in the late 19th century, from August Weismann,
The mouse guy.
the mouse guy. He did this simple but brutal experiment. He took mice and cut off their tails, then he let them breed. Did it again to the next generation,
Of necks.
for 20 generations.
And if Lamarck was right.
The babies should eventually have been born with shorter tails or no tails at all, right? The acquired characteristic taillessness should have been inherited. Nope. Every single generation, the baby mice were born with perfectly normal tails. It was clear proof that changes to the body cells, the soma, during life don't get passed down through the germline, the sperm and eggs. Inheritance works through genes, through DNA, not through life experiences physically altering heredity.
And unfortunately, this scientifically flawed idea, Lamarckism, got tangled up with politics in a really damaging way. The story of Lysenkoism.
Oh yeah, this is such a critical cautionary tale about science and ideology. Trofim Lysenko, he was an agronomist in the Soviet Union under Stalin. He completely rejected Darwinian natural selection.
Why?
Well, part of Darwin's mechanism relies on Malthus's idea of a struggle for existence due to limited resources and competition.
Yeah.
Lysenko and the state ideology found the idea of competition fundamentally capitalist and unacceptable. So he promoted a kind of state-sponsored Lamarckism instead.
And he tried to apply this to agriculture.
Disastrously so. He had this theory called vernalization. He claimed he could make crops like wheat cold-resistant by essentially exposing the seeds to cold and moisture. He argued the seeds would acquire cold tolerance and pass it directly to the next generation, completely ignoring Mendelian genetics.
And they actually implemented this.
Across the Soviet Union, they sidelined or even persecuted actual geneticists who knew it wouldn't work. The results were predictable and horrific. Massive crop failures, contributing to terrible famines. It's a stark reminder of what happens when politics dictates science.
Right. So that sets the stage for Darwin. He knew about Lamarck, knew about change over time, but needed a better mechanism. And he got key insights from outside biology, didn't he?
Absolutely. Two huge influences. First, the geologist Charles Lyell. Exactly. Lyell's uniformitarianism, the idea that the geological processes we see today, like erosion, sedimentation, volcanoes, have been operating slowly and consistently over vast stretches of time. This gave Darwin the immense time scale he needed for gradual evolutionary change to occur. Without Lyell's deep time, Darwin's slow, gradual mechanism wouldn't seem plausible.
And the second big trigger was Thomas Malthus.
Yes, Malthus's essay on population. The core idea. Populations tend to increase exponentially, but resources, like food, only increase arithmetically or linearly. This inevitably leads to a struggle for existence. Not everyone born can possibly survive and reproduce.
Darwin read that and had his light bulb moment,
Yeah.
applying it to all of nature.
Pretty much. It led him straight to the core logic of natural selection. You can break it down to a few key steps.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, variation. Individuals within any population vary in their traits. Think different beak shapes in finches, different running speeds in antelopes. And crucially, this variation has to be heritable, meaning it can be passed down.
Okay, variation and heritability.
Second, overproduction. Organisms produce more offspring than can possibly survive given limited resources. This leads directly to Malthus's point, the struggle for existence. Competition for food, mates, avoiding predators.
So not everyone makes it.
Which leads to the third point, differential survival and reproduction. Because of the struggle, individuals with traits that make them better suited to their specific environment are more likely to survive long enough to reproduce and to have more offspring than less well-suited individuals.
That's the selection part. The environment is doing the selecting.
Exactly. That is natural selection. The environment acts as a filter. Over long periods, generations upon generations, the accumulation of these small advantageous changes, driven by environmental pressures, leads to adaptation and, eventually, the origin of new species. That was Darwin's idea of gradualism.
But even Darwin knew his theory wasn't totally complete, and he faced a lot of criticism back then. Two big ones always come up: the gaps in the fossil record and the sheer complexity of life.
Yeah, the fossil record was a fair point initially. Critics said, where are the intermediate forms? The missing links showing the smooth transitions. And, fossilization is rare, the record is incomplete. But since Darwin's time, we found thousands of incredible transitional fossils that fill many of those gaps beautifully.
Like Archaeopteryx, linking dinosaurs and birds.
Perfect example. And what about the complexity argument, usually focused on things like the human eye?
Right, the argument of irreducible complexity. How could something so complex evolve step by step? What good is half an eye?
Darwin tackled this head-on. He argued that complex organs evolved through a series of intermediate stages, each of which provided some advantage, even if it wasn't the full function we see today. And biology backs this up. We see a whole range of eye complexity in nature right now.
From simple light-sensitive spots?
In flatworms, which are perfectly functional for them, to cup eyes, to pinhole camera eyes in nautilus, all the way up to our sophisticated lens eye. Each step provides a benefit over the previous one. So gradualism works because those intermediate forms are useful.
Okay, so Darwin lays the groundwork, deals with criticism, but the theory really solidifies later with the modern synthesis, or neo-Darwinism. This is where genetics comes in.
Exactly. This happened mainly between the 1930s and 1950s. It merged Darwin's natural selection with the science of genetics, which Darwin himself knew nothing about. He knew traits were inherited, but not how.
Mendel's peas.
Mendel's work, rediscovered later, showed that inheritance works through discrete units genes. Then we figured out that mutation, random changes in DNA, is the ultimate source of new genetic variation. Natural selection then acts on that variation.
And it wasn't just about individuals anymore, but whole populations changing.
Right. The synthesis integrated population genetics. We started studying how allele frequencies change in populations over time. This brought in concepts like gene flow, mixing genes between populations through migration or interbreeding, and genetic drift.
Drift being the random changes, especially in small groups.
Yeah, like the founder effect when a small group starts a new population, or a bottleneck when a population crashes. These random factors can change gene frequency significantly, especially when population size is small. Putting all that together, Darwin's selection, Mendel's inheritance, mutation, gene flow, drift, gave us the robust, comprehensive theory of evolution we have today.
So as scientists studied evolution more, looking across these vast timescales, they noticed something interesting. It isn't always just random branching. There seem to be, well, patterns, maybe even rules or constraints that shape the process.
Yeah, that's right. Evolution has a history, and that history can influence its future path. This led to specific concepts, a kind of specialized vocabulary, to describe these large-scale patterns. First up is a really interesting one about irreversibility. Dollo's rule.
Dollo's rule sounds a bit final. What does it say?
Proposed by Louis Dollo, a Belgian paleontologist, it basically states that evolution doesn't easily go backwards. Once a complex trait or structure, something that required a whole series of specific genetic and developmental steps to build, is lost in a lineage, it's extremely unlikely that the exact same complex trait will re-evolve later in that lineage.
So evolution's kind of path-dependent. It burns its bridges.
In a way, yes. The genetic pathways, the developmental sequences get dismantled or repurposed for other things. Rebuilding the exact same complex structure from scratch becomes highly improbable.
Can you give us a solid example?
The classic one is flightless birds. Ostriches, emus, kiwis, they all descended from ancestors that could fly. They lost the incredibly complex set of adaptations needed for powered flight. The wing structure, the keel bone for muscle attachment, the specific feathers, the hollow bones, the respiratory system changes.
Because they didn't need it anymore in their environment.
Right. Maybe they were on islands with no predators or became large ground-dwelling runners. They might still have tiny vestigial wings, but the idea that they could, down the line, re-evolve the entire intricate machinery for powered flight is considered, well, virtually impossible by Dollo's rule.
Okay, so that's about losing things. What about trends over time? There's Cope's rule.
Cope's rule observes a tendency, and it's just a tendency, not an absolute law, for lineages to evolve towards larger body size over geological time.
Bigger is better, evolutionarily speaking. Why would that be a trend?
Well, there can be real advantages to being bigger. Better defense against predators, often better ability to capture prey or compete for resources like food or territory. Larger animals often have better thermal regulation too, and in some cases, larger size is favored in sexual selection, bigger males winning contests for mates.
And we see this playing out in the fossil record.
Quite often, yes. The textbook example is the evolution of horses, the family Equidae.
From the little dog-sized one.
Exactly. Eohippus, or Hyracotherium, from about 50 million years ago, was small, lived in forests, had multiple toes. But as climates changed and grassland spread, the horse lineage generally trended towards larger size, fewer toes, ending in the single hoof, and teeth adapted for grazing. Being big and fast was an advantage on the open plains.
Makes sense. Okay, irreversibility with Dollo, size trend with Cope. The last one, mosaic evolution, feels really important for understanding us.
It's absolutely crucial for the human story. Mosaic evolution is the principle that different parts of an organism, different systems, can evolve at different rates. It's not like the whole body changes in lockstep. Some features might change rapidly, while others stay primitive or change much more slowly.
Like putting together a mosaic picture, piece by piece, not all at once.
That's a perfect analogy. Evolution tinkers with different modules independently or semi-independently.
How does this apply directly to hominin evolution?
It's fundamental to understanding the sequence of changes. We often lump human traits together: big brains, tool use, walking upright. But mosaic evolution tells us they didn't all arrive as a package deal. The classic example is bipedalism evolved before big brains.
So the Australopithecines, like Lucy.
Exactly. They were clearly walking upright quite efficiently based on their hips, legs, feet, and those Laetoli footprints. But their brain size was still relatively small, much closer to a chimpanzee's than to ours.
So walking came first.
Walking came first. That freed the hands, enabling more sophisticated tool use and carrying, which then likely created new selective pressures favoring better cognition, social learning, and eventually the dramatic brain expansion we see later in the genus Homo. The timing is key. Understanding that mosaic pattern feet and legs changing first, then hands becoming more dexterous, then brains enlarging, then changes in teeth and faces, that's how we reconstruct this step-by-step story.
Right, with those evolutionary principles, Dollo, Cope, mosaic evolution in mind, we can now walk through our actual ancestors, our hominin family tree. Let's start way back in the Pliocene, with the Australopithecines. These guys were around from roughly 4 million down to maybe 1.5 million years ago.
And we find them across a pretty wide area of Africa, right? Not just one spot.
That's key. We have major finds in South Africa. Think of the tone child, the first Australopithecus africanus discovered. It showed this weird mix. Ape-like skull features, but more human-like teeth, and crucially, the position of the foramen magnum suggested upright posture.
And then East Africa, the Rift Valley, gave us some superstars. Oh yeah, East Africa is famous for specimens like Lucy, the incredibly complete Australopithecus afarensis skeleton, and those amazing Laetoli footprints, 3.6 million years old, preserving tracks of 2 or 3 individuals walking bipedally side by side. Undeniable proof of upright walking, long before brains got big.
Now, within the Australopithecines, researchers usually talk about 2 main types, based on their build, gracile and robust. What's the difference?
It really comes down to their jaws and teeth, reflecting different diets. The gracile forms, like Africanus and afarensis, Lucy's species, were, well, more lightly built. Smaller faces, smaller teeth overall. Their diet was probably more varied, maybe fruits, leaves, insects, perhaps some meat scavenging. More generalized.
Okay, and the robust ones, they sound heavy-duty.
They really were. The robust Australopithecine species like Australopithecus robustus in South Africa, and especially Australopithecus boisei, sometimes called Paranthropus boisei, in East Africa, nicknamed Nutcracker Man, were dietary specialists.
Nutcracker Man tells you something right there.
Absolutely. They had enormous faces, massive jaws, and truly gigantic molars, like huge grinding platforms, often 4 times the surface area of our molars, built for immense crushing power.
And they had that ridge on their skull.
Many of them, especially the males, had a prominent sagittal crest, a ridge of bone running along the top of the skull, front to back. This wasn't for show. It was an anchor point for huge temporalis muscles, the main chewing muscles that run up the side of the head. All this points to a diet focused on really tough, fibrous, abrasive stuff. Hard nuts, seeds, roots, tubers. They were specialized grinders.
So different ecological niches, driving different anatomy within the same basic group.
Exactly. Mosaic evolution in action, even within the Australopithecines.
And critically, where did tools first come into the picture with these guys?
This is a huge point. For a long time, tool use was thought to begin with Homo. But then came the discovery of Australopithecus garhi in Ethiopia, dated to about 2.5 million years ago.
What was found with Garhi?
Fossils of garhi were found near animal bones, antelope bones that had clear-cut marks on them, made by stone tools. And nearby, they found some of the oldest known stone tools, very simple cores and flakes, what we call oldowan or pebble tools.
So an Australopithecine was likely making tools and butchering animals.
That's the strong implication. Garhi might represent that crucial transition among the first hominins we know of who were systematically crafting stone tools, probably to access nutrient-rich meat and marrow from carcasses. That dietary shift, getting more high-quality food, was likely a key factor enabling the later evolution of larger brains in Homo.
Okay, so the Australopithecines set the stage. Then comes the genus Homo, and the first species to really make a mark globally. Homo erectus, the traveler.
Yeah, H. erectus was incredibly successful. They originated in Africa, maybe around 1.8, 1.9 million years ago, and then relatively quickly spread out across Asia, maybe even into parts of Europe. A huge expansion.
We know them from those really famous fossils found far from Africa, right?
Absolutely. Finds like Java man, Pithecanthropus erectus, as it was first called, in Indonesia, and Peking man, Sinanthropus pekinensis, found in caves near Beijing, China. These discoveries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were mind-blowing at the time, proving ancient human relatives existed far beyond Africa. Later, of course, many important H. erectus fossils were found in Africa too, like the Turkana boy,
Anatomically, they look much more like us than the Australopithecines did. How did they differ?
Big jump in cranial capacity. Average around 1,000 cubic centimeters, which is getting close to the modern human average, though still generally smaller. But their skull shape was very distinctive.
The brow ridge.
That massive, shelf-like supraorbital torus, continuous across the eyes, very characteristic. Also a low, long skull vault, thick skull bones, and receding frontal bones, no high forehead like ours.
Yeah.
But from the neck down, their body proportions were essentially modern. They were committed, efficient bipeds, tall and capable of long-distance running.
And their success wasn't just anatomy. They made major cultural leaps. Tools got better.
Definitely. H. erectus is associated with the Acheulean tool industry. This replaced the simpler Old One tools. The hallmark of the Acheulean is the biface, especially the symmetrical, teardrop-shaped hand axe.
That classic Stone Age tool everyone pictures.
Pretty much. And making one required more skill, more planning, and a clearer mental template than just bashing rocks together. They were standardized, versatile tools used for butchering, chopping wood, digging. It represents a significant cognitive advance.
And the other massive cultural innovation linked to Homo erectus is fire.
Controlled use of fire. This is huge. The evidence gets stronger around 700,000, 800,000 years ago, maybe even earlier at some sites like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel.
What did fire allow them to do?
So many things. Warmth, obviously crucial for surviving in colder climates as they moved out of Africa. Protection from predators at night. Light, extending the usable hours of the day for socializing, tool making, planning, and of course cooking.
Back to cooking again. Making food safer, more digestible, more energy rich.
Exactly. Cooking likely played a massive role in fueling the H. erectus brain and body.
Yeah.
And this shift towards higher quality food, more meat, cooked food, might also be linked to another interesting biological change we see in H. erectus.
Yes.
A noticeable decrease in sexual dimorphism compared to the Australopithecines. Males weren't dramatically larger than females anymore.
Why is that significant? What does less size difference suggest?
In primates, high sexual dimorphism often correlates with intense male-male competition, maybe polygynous mating systems where dominant males monopolize females. Reduced dimorphism might suggest a shift towards more cooperative social structures, perhaps more stable pair bonds.
Or maybe related to the challenges of raising those big-brained babies.
Quite possibly. Larger brains mean longer dependency periods for offspring. Bipedalism, as we said, narrows the birth canal. Raising H. erectus infants successfully probably required more cooperative care, maybe involving fathers more, or other group members. Some researchers invoke the grandmother hypothesis here, older females helping raise grandchildren, which would also select for different social dynamics. It's all interconnected.
Okay, fast forward a bit. We get to our most famous and maybe most enigmatic extinct relatives. The Neanderthals, the Ice Age specialists of Eurasia.
That's right, Homo neanderthalensis. They thrived in Europe and Western Asia from maybe 400,000 years ago down to about 40,000 years ago. They were incredibly well adapted to the cold, harsh environments of Ice Age Europe.
Physically, they look different from us, quite robust.
Very robust. Short and stocky build, which conserves heat, think Allen's and Bergman's rules. Powerful muscles. But their skull is really distinctive. Cranial capacity was large, on average slightly larger than modern humans today, but the shape was different. Long and low, not high and rounded like ours, an occipital bun at the back.
And their faces.
Very characteristic. A projecting midface was called total facial prognatism. Huge nasal openings maybe for warming cold air. Big front teeth, incisors that often show heavy wear.
Used as tools.
Possibly used like a third hand for gripping hides or materials while working them. And crucially, they lacked a prominent bony chin like we have. That's a defining feature of Homo sapiens.
Now, the sources mention variation within Neanderthals' conservative versus progressive types. What's that about?
Yeah, this reflects the fact that Neanderthals weren't monolithic. The conservative or classical type, like the old man from La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, shows the really extreme features. Super robust, maybe more specialized for the coldest periods. The progressive type, sometimes found further east or perhaps later in time, like some fossils from Mount Carmel in Israel, might show slightly less extreme features, maybe a bit more overlap with early modern humans.
Does that suggest interbreeding or just regional variation?
That was a huge debate. It hints at a dynamic picture, regional adaptation, maybe gene flow between different Neanderthal groups, and potentially, yes, contact, and maybe some mixing with arriving modern humans even before the main replacement event. It complicates the simple us versus them picture.
Culturally, they weren't primitive brutes either. They had sophisticated tools.
Absolutely. They're associated with the Mousterian tool industry. This is a step up from the Acheulean. It often involved the levalloy technique, a clever way of preparing a stone core so you could strike off flakes of a predetermined size and shape. Requires a lot of foresight and skill.
And they hunted big game, used fire.
Definitely controlled fire. They were skilled hunters of large Ice Age animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, reindeer, and the evidence for symbolic behavior is growing. Possible intentional burials, use of pigments like ochre, maybe even personal ornaments like pierced shells or eagle talons. Much more complex than previously thought.
Which brings us to the big question, what happened to them? And how did we, Homo sapiens, emerge? This involves the debate over the different models of modern human origins.
Right, this has been a major area of research and argument for decades. Traditionally, there were two main opposing camps, plus a compromise view that's gained a lot of ground.
Okay, model one, the clean sweep.
That's the complete replacement model, most famously known as the recent out-of-Africa hypothesis. The idea is that Homo sapiens evolved only in Africa, probably around 200,000 to 150,000 years ago. Then, sometime later, maybe 60,000, 70,000 years ago, they migrated out of Africa and spread across the globe.
And as they spread,
They completely replaced all the pre-existing archaic hominin populations they encountered, like Homo erectus descendants in Asia and Neanderthals in Europe and West Asia, essentially without any significant interbreeding. It was a replacement event.
okay, model two takes a very different view.
That's the regional continuity model, also called multi-regional evolution. This model proposed that modern humans didn't just evolve in Africa. Instead, they evolved in place in different regions, Africa, Europe, Asia, all descending from earlier Homo erectus populations that were already there.
But if they were evolving separately, how did they end up as one species, Homo sapiens?
The key mechanism in this model is continuous gene flow. It argues there was always enough interbreeding and migration between these different regional populations to keep them connected, sharing genes, and essentially evolving together as a single widespread species, eventually all converging on the modern human form.
So, no single origin point, more like a global network.
Exactly. Now, both of those models had strengths and weaknesses based on the fossil and archaeological evidence available at the time.
But then genetics entered the picture, especially ancient DNA, and led to the third model.
Precisely. The partial replacement model emerged as a kind of compromise, strongly supported now by genetic data, especially from Neanderthal and Denisovan genomes. This model agrees with out of Africa on the primary origin of Homo sapiens in Africa.
So we did originate in Africa and migrate out.
Yes, the bulk of our ancestry is African, but the partial part is key. As modern humans spread out, they did encounter those archaic populations like Neanderthals and Denisovans. And crucially, they interbred with them, at least to some extent.
It's not a complete replacement, but some mixing.
Exactly. There was limited gene flow from these archaic groups into the expanding modern human populations. That's why most non-African people today carry a small percentage, typically 1–3% of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. And some populations, particularly in Asia and Oceania, also carry DNA from Denisovans. So the archaic populations did eventually go extinct, but not before leaving a slight genetic echo in us. It wasn't a simple replacement, it was more complex, involving some absorption.
Okay, so we've traced the ancestors, the theories, the debates. Let's zoom in on us, Homo sapiens sapiens. What anatomically defines us, especially when you compare us directly to our closest living relatives, the apes? It all seems to circle back to standing upright.
It really does. Our whole skeleton is remodeled for orthograde posture, meaning upright and habitual bipedalism. Apes generally are pronagrade body, horizontal, and move via quadrupedalism, knuckle walking, or brachiation swinging.
Where are the dead giveaways in the skeleton that scream biped?
Start at the base of the skull. Our foramen magnum, the big hole where the spinal cord connects, is positioned centrally underneath the skull. This balances the head directly on top of the spine, needing less muscle power to hold it up.
Whereas in an ape,
It's further back, angled backward, because their head juts forward from a more horizontal spine. Other key skull features for us: strong mastoid processes behind the ears for neck muscle attachment, a high rounded skull vault housing that big brain, a near vertical forehead, reduced brow ridges compared to ancestors, and uniquely, that pointy bit on the lower jaw, the mental eminence, our chin. No other hominin really had a prominent chin like ours.
and down at the other end, the feet tell the story too.
Absolutely. The human foot is an arched platform, built for shock absorption and propulsion. The defining feature is our big toe. It's large, powerful, and critically non-opposable. It's locked in line with the other toes to provide that final push-off during walking.
Unlike an ape's foot.
An ape's big toe is opposable, like a thumb, great for grasping branches. Ours is purely for stable, efficient walking and running. That transition from a grasping foot to a rigid, propulsive lever is fundamental to being human.
But this commitment to erect posture, as amazing as it was, came with downsides, didn't it? We touched on this.
Big time. The benefits are huge: freed hands, efficient travel. But the major cost is tied to reproduction. Remodeling the pelvis to be a stable, bowl-shaped platform for walking inherently narrows the birth canal.
Just as evolution was favoring bigger brains in babies.
Exactly. It's the obstetrical dilemma. You have selection for a wide pelvis for birthing large-headed infants clashing with selection for a narrower pelvis for efficient bipedal locomotion.
Which makes human childbirth
Unusually difficult, painful, and dangerous compared to other primates. The baby has to do that complex rotation to get through. It's a major biological compromise, and it likely reinforced the need for social support during birth midwifery, cooperative care, further weaving biology and culture together.
Before we dive fully into genetics, maybe it's worth putting our social structure in context. We think we're complex, but other primates have pretty sophisticated societies too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Understanding primate social structure provides crucial background. Humans, like chimpanzees and bonobos, often live in fission fusion societies.
Meaning groups split up and come back together.
Yeah, the main community might split into smaller foraging parties during the day, fission, and then regroup later for sleeping or socializing, fusion. It's very flexible. And chimpanzees, our closest relatives, show incredible social complexity. They have intricate, long-lasting political alliances, often based on kinship, especially matrilineal ties. They recognize social hierarchies, engage in reconciliation after conflicts.
But it's not all peaceful cooperation. The sources mention a dark side, too.
That's important context as well. Chimpanzee societies also feature intense intergroup aggression. Coordinated lethal raids on neighboring communities have been well documented. Sometimes this involves killing infants of rival groups. It's a reminder that complex sociality in primates, including us, encompasses both cooperation and conflict, altruism and aggression. These deep behavioral patterns are part of our evolutionary heritage.
Okay, so we have the anatomy, the behavior. Let's get down to the blueprint, heredity. How do scientists figure out how traits are passed down in humans, given we can't do controlled breeding experiments? Pedigree analysis must be key.
It's fundamental. Pedigree analysis is basically creating a family tree, but specifically charting the presence or absence of a particular trait or genetic disorder across generations using standardized symbols. By looking at the pattern, we can often deduce how the trait is inherited.
Like if a trait shows up in every generation.
That strongly suggests an autosomal dominant pattern. You only need one copy of the dominant allele to express the trait. Think Huntington's disease, or something simple like having a cleft chin. If you have it, at least one of your parents must have had it too, barring new mutations.
And if it skips generations?
That's the hallmark of an autosomal recessive trait, like cystic fibrosis or albinism. You need two copies of the recessive allele to show the trait. Parents are often unaffected carriers, each having one copy. That's why it can seem to disappear and then reappear later.
And then there are traits linked to the sex chromosomes.
Right. X-linked traits like red-green colorblindness or hemophilia show different patterns in males and females because males only have one X. And Y-linked traits are passed directly from father to all his sons and only affect males. The classic example, though rare, is hypertrichosis of the ear, excessive hair on the ears. Pedigrees make these patterns visible.
The other major tool, especially for untangling genes versus environment, is twin studies.
Hugely powerful. Twin studies are designed to estimate heritability, basically. What proportion of the variation we see in a trait within a population is due to genetic differences versus environmental differences.
And they do this by comparing identical and fraternal twins.
Exactly. Monozygotic, MZ, or identical twins, develop from a single fertilized egg that splits, so they share virtually 100% of their genes. Dizygotic, DZ, or fraternal twins, develop from two separate eggs fertilized by two different sperm. Genetically, they're just like regular siblings, sharing about 50% of their genes on average.
So the logic is, if identical twins who are genetically the same are much more similar for a particular trait, say height or IQ score or risk for schizophrenia, than fraternal twins are.
Even if they were raised in slightly different environments, or sometimes very different environments if adopted apart, that provides strong evidence that genetic factors play a significant role in that trait. By comparing the similarity concordance rates between MZ and DZ twins, researchers can mathematically estimate the heritability.
It helps tease apart nature and nurture.
It's one of the best tools we have for doing that, for complex human traits. Everything from physical characteristics to personality dimensions to susceptibility to diseases. These genetic methods, combined with analyzing DNA directly, including ancient DNA now, allow us to test and refine the evolutionary narratives built from fossils and archaeology. Hashtag Outro. So we've covered a huge amount of ground today, a real deep dive. We started with that core concept, the engine of human evolution, the constant interplay, that biocultural feedback loop.
Yeah, how standing up freed the hands for tools, how cooking fueled bigger brains, how language accelerated everything. It's all connected.
Then we trace the history of the ideas themselves, from Lamarck's early attempt through the danger zone of Lysenkoism to Darwin's revolution and its strengthening by the modern synthesis with genetics.
And we looked at those evolutionary rules like Dallo's and Cope's, and especially mosaic evolution, which is key to understanding the sequence of changes in our ancestors.
Right, applying that to the hominin lineage itself. We met the Australopithecines, the early bipeds, with their gracile and robust forms showing dietary specialization.
Then the globe-trotting Homo erectus with their advanced Acheulean tools and the game-changing mastery of fire.
Followed by our complex cousins, the Neanderthals, masters of the Ice Age, with their Mousterian technology and surprisingly sophisticated behaviors.
Which led us to the models for our own origin out of Africa, multi-regionalism, and the current leading contender based on genetics.
The partial replacement model. This acknowledges our primary African origin, but incorporates that fascinating twist revealed by ancient DNA, limited interbreeding with Neanderthals and Denisovans as modern humans spread.
Our story isn't one of simple conquest, but interaction and absorption.
Exactly. We carry echoes of those ancient encounters in our genes today.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to ponder. Given that most people with ancestry outside of Africa carry some Neanderthal DNA, and we know those genes influence things like immunity, skin pigmentation, maybe even adaptation to cold, what subtle traits, what almost invisible biological ghosts might you carry from them?
Think about it. How might those snippets of DNA, inherited across tens of thousands of years from our robust Ice Age cousins, still be subtly influencing your biology, your health, maybe even how you respond to the world today? It's a fascinating connection to our deep shared past.
Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on The Deep